Hi everyone, and welcome to my virtual talk. My name is Vladimir Jovanovic, and for the past 2.5 years, I've been working as an Android developer at Flixbus. Today, we'll be talking about two mobile teams at Flixbus and their fight with legacy code. When I first joined, the Flixbus Android application was in a pretty bad shape. It was one huge monolith app with a bunch of different features added by different people without much consideration for the app's architecture. I would describe its architecture something like this. So yes, it was clear from the Android codebase that Flixbus was in a full-on startup mode. But the Android app was not the only problem. We also have the iOS app, which was at that time in the same state of despair. About a year and a half ago, we decided that something needed to be done. We were drowning in technical debt. It was struggle to work on the project. Everything was coupled together. Network, storage, UI. This meant that changing one part of the app would introduce bugs in a seemingly independent part of the code base. We also had some deprecated libraries that we were struggling to update. Because of all of this, onboarding was taking a considerable amount of time, and it was pretty much impossible to onboard juniors. Also, because the app was strongly coupled, every bug fix introduced unknown amount of bugs at random places. If you know that one episode of TV show Malcolm in the Middle when Hal is trying to replace the light bulb, that's the best example on how it feels when working on a coupled code base. This meant that new features were taking a long time to implement. And since we didn't have a clear picture about how the new app's architecture should look like, every new feature had its own architecture. Every new feature was also relying on some existing part of the code base. And when you combine that with some randomly chosen approach, you get what's known as Frankenstein architecture. This meant that we had a lot of these Frankenstein architectures throughout our code base. And we had a lot of to-dos, really all to-dos that sometimes had nothing to do with the code below them. Also, iOS was in the same position, but all of their problems were written in Objective-C. As you can see, we were in a lot of trouble and our code bases were falling apart and something needed to be done. Before we go into how we decided to solve these problems, let's check out what do you think is the best way to tackle these issues. Please go to Slido, and the question is really simple. If you were working on an old app that's hard to maintain and it's almost impossible to add new features, what would be your preferred way of improving it? First answer, rewriting the app, which means scrapping most of the code base and creating a new app, and refactoring the app, which means keeping most of the code base and trying to iteratively improve it. While you're filling the poll, I will go through some information about the company so you can get a better sense of the scale of the problem. Flixbus was founded in 2013 in Germany, and in the following couple of years, it expanded rapidly in the EU market. In 2018, it started operating in the US, and right now is in the process of expanding to some other markets. Flixbus is trying to own as few buses as possible, and our main business model is to provide network planning, marketing, pricing, quality management, and customer service to our partner companies. We operate in 30 countries and have more than 2,500 stations that are connected by more than 400,000 daily connections. So far, Flixbus transported more than 100 million passengers with the help of its 3,000 employees and 500 network partners and their 10,000 drivers. Or to be more precise, these were our numbers, but then this happened. IT is a big part of Flixbus's business model. We have more than 300 people in FlixTech, and most of them are software developers and data engineers. Mobile developers have six developers each, 2 QA engineers, and 2 UX UI designers. We are supporting one iOS app and one Android app, and each of them has more than 10 million downloads. Apart from booking funnel, which is the most important part of the app, There are some other features such as user profile, ticket management system, real-time tracking of the buses, customer support, and many other features. Code bases have around 300,000 lines of code each. And a year and a half ago, those were 300,000 lines of unmaintainable legacy code. Let me just quickly check the poll results. Can we get them on the screen?
So I can read it. The poll results are for 67% for refactoring and 33% for rewriting.
Okay, interesting. I hope that some of you will change your opinion by the end of the talk. So yeah, let's proceed. As you may have already guessed, Flixbus is not the first company to struggle with legacy code. There is a saying that any given company is either currently fixing legacy code or generating it. Most startups are focused on growth and don't really care about apps architecture, scalability, or sustainability. Features are being added one after another, teams are growing fast, and there is no time to define code style or architecture. Just make it work and add to-dos for later. Because refactoring is not needed to grow, startup companies spend their first years creating legacy code. And don't get me wrong, that's how it should be. There is a reason why you don't know any big company without technical debt. Companies that focus on refactoring too early inevitably fail because they kill its own growth. You should not be optimizing before there is a reason for it. You want your product user tested as soon as possible, or in other words, you want to put your idea in production with a minimal investment because you have no idea if it's going to work. A lot of companies change their business model a couple of times in first years until they have useful product that brings real value to the customers. At that point, they are stuck with a bad code base that brings value to the customers. The company is growing and developers are complaining. So everything is how it should be, right? But at some point, technical debt starts slowing down the company's growth. It becomes painfully slow to add new features, the app becomes unstable, it becomes easy to introduce bugs, and so on. It becomes a business problem. As long as it's developers' problem, it's not that important. Developers are used to problems. That's what we do, solve problems. But when it becomes a business problem, that's the time to solve it. You don't want your growth being slowed down by refactoring, but you don't want it being slowed down by technical debt either. That's the time when business people should come to developers and politely ask them to solve that small issue that they have with their code base. And that's not something that you need to ask twice because developers already asked for the time to refactor like 10 times. And that's exactly what happened at Flixbus. The business became aware that legacy code is slowing down the company's growth. A year and a half ago, Android and iOS teams got a task to fix their code bases. After a lot of meetings and discussions, Android and iOS team came up with a solution. We are going to, drumroll, what? So having seemingly the same problems, Android and iOS team decided for the different approaches. So let's see what happened. Our code bases were in the same state of chaos, but iOS had one problem that tipped the scale. Objective-C. Us in Android team had much easier time when it comes to refactoring and decoupling. Our code bases were 100% written in Java, and we wanted to rewrite to Kotlin, but there was no pressure to do it. Java was and is still supported, and the vast majority of Android developers know how to write Java code. Our plan was to extract one feature in a separate module, protect it with interfaces, convert it to Kotlin if necessary, add some tests, and that's it. One feature refactored and decoupled. At least that's what we thought. Later we'll see how did it go. For the iOS team, it was much harder doing this because of Objective-C. Yes, it's also possible to rewrite to Swift step by step. The problem is that Swift came out in 2014 and was adopted by developers really fast. This meant that they would need to find developer with a lot of experience who is willing to support Objective-C codebase. That was hard and expensive. Another reason was that there was only one developer left from the old team who knew the old code base, so he would need to onboard all new developers to this old code base that even he didn't fully understand. So they basically had no choice. They decided to write a new app. Let's see how it went. We can start with the iOS team. The initial estimation that the iOS team had is that they would release first version of the new app after 6 months. This was at that time seemingly realistic estimation, as they managed to get a feature freeze. This meant that no new features would be added to the app and all manpower and resources would be poured into creation of the new app. The first problem was that most of the time in first weeks and even months was spent on meetings, arguing, making plans. Starting something new is hard because you start making all the important decisions ahead of time. And this inevitably becomes a series of long meetings about nothing. Why nothing? Because there is nothing. You still didn't write a single line of code. You're just having talks at length about how to keep your non-existing code base forever young. But after some time, pressure grows and you have to come up with a plan. After the plan was in place, they started creating legacy code. The new app in the pure Swift. The new version of the app was released 16 months later. And what are the reasons for the delay? Well, first, they underestimated the complexity of the app. It had much more functionalities and features than it may seem on a first glance. Also, they spent a lot of meetings on a lot of time on meetings, deciding how to organize code base, creating a code style, making decisions about apps architecture, all of this without writing a lot of code. And when they finally started writing code, they realized that plans needed to be adjusted in order for them to work. Another reason was that while they were building a new app, there were a couple of features that needed to be added to the old one because of legal reasons and business requirements. So they had to break the feature freeze. They also had to cut as much features as possible out of the app, implementing just things necessary for the booking flow. This way, they shortened the time that users would have to wait for the new app to be released, but created negative impact on user satisfaction and business by taking away features from the users. The plan that was in place was broken. As mentioned, their first plan was to create a pure Swift app. But again, because of pressure and time constraints, they decided to port one feature out of the old app into the new one. So they introduced Objective-C into their new code base. Also, like any other respectable company, Flixbus is changing its analytics tools at least once every year. This created final problem: how to measure that this new app is performing any better than the old one. Old app is using some old analytic tool from like last year that everybody forgot exists. And new app is using new fancy analytic tool that, everybody are using now. So if you ever had two different analytic tools in one app, you know that numbers are never the same. So they had to introduce this new analytic tool into the old app. But guess what? Analytic tools have the same problems. The SDK compatible with Objective-C works totally differently from the one written for Swift. So the numbers were still not the same, or as they should be. This was the last and most unexpected thing that held the release. As you can see, rewrite didn't go as planned. New problems arose, plans changed, things got more complicated. At some point, they even had small refactoring of the new app. It would be totally unfair to say that nothing went well. Working on the new app made the iOS team stronger and more stable. Right now, they have no problems attracting new developers and onboarding them. And the app is performing much better than the old one. The app also has a fresh new design, and it's a big improvement when it comes to user experience. And how did Android handle refactoring? Well, we are still refactoring. And it seems that we are going to do it forever, but not in the current capacity. We just don't want to end up in this situation again, in a situation that requires major refactoring. As you may remember, we started with a single monolith module. Our dream was to create something like this. And right now we are on the right way. We fully extracted network and storage parts of the app and managed to extract almost everything related to search and payment. Currently, the Android project has more than 45 modules, but our main module still contains more than, I think, 30% of our code base, because some modules are just partially extracted. The same as the iOS team, we spent the first weeks arguing what to refactor first and how to refactoring and creating plans about refactoring. But compared to the iOS team, we had much easier time, as we had to create plan just for a small part of the app or a specific feature and not for the whole project. In the process, we managed to convert almost 70% of our code base to Kotlin. Because we needed to do refactoring in parallel with new features, we were not able to have long-running refactoring or feature branches, as it would be pretty much impossible to resolve merge conflicts after just a couple of weeks. Because of that, we are using what's known as trunk-based development. We split everything into small tasks. Every task that's done is immediately merged into the master branch. And if it's not production ready, it's hidden behind a feature flag. This way, we are sure that project compiles after every feature and after every refactoring. And we have much less merge conflicts in the process. We also had a lot of issues following this plan. It's extremely difficult to refactor the app with this kind of constraints. You would start extracting one feature out of your main monolith module, and then you would realize that it depends on another feature that's still in monolith module. So you would stop and you would create task to extract that other feature. Then you would start working on that one, and you would realize that that one depends on 3 other features, and one of them is being modified by another developer because there is a need to add some functionality there. So what's the solution for this? Patience. You repeat this until you come to the bottom of your dependency graph, and you start extracting smallest features first. Whenever you extract something out of your main module, you make your code base cleaner and your life easier. And then after some time, you start climbing up your dependency graph and now start extracting features that have bigger features that now have hopefully much less dependency in your main module. There is one more problem with refactoring, that we encountered. You may remember those Frankenstein architectures that I mentioned. That was still one of the biggest problems with the app. We are trying to have uniform development experience throughout our project, but we are still far away from it. Some screens in the app have all the logic inside activity. Some are using MVP, some are using MVVM. Some parts of the app use auto value, some are using Kotlin data classes. Some parts use dreaded async tasks, some are using coroutines. But here it's important to be realistic and honest with yourself, and also to control your OCD. The value that users and the company would get from refactoring, for example, FAQ screen to MVVM is minimal, and that work would bring much bigger value if applied to some other part of the app. So here the biggest problem for us was to become comfortable with having some parts of the app in this state, in a bad state. The easiest way to do this is to modularize your app. Apart from usual benefits of modularization, such as dependency enforcement and clear separations of concerns, it also provides an easy way to control your OCD by using a technique known as divide and conquer. You shift your focus from the whole app to just specific modules, and you try making them as clean as possible and not the whole app. As you can see, both approaches have their pros and cons. So let's go through them and see how they compare. First, let's check pros of rewrite. It can be extremely attractive for new developers to get the opportunity to work on a new project. This is great if you want to attract new developers into your company. It also offers an easy way for the company to introduce new and fancy technologies into their code base. And hopefully, when you're done, your new code base will be in a better shape than the old one. But this doesn't necessarily have to happen. And what are the cons of rewrite? A new project requires a lot of planning. And because it's a totally new project, you have to plan everything. Customers are not getting new features. If you do everything extremely well, your new app will have exactly the same set of features as the previous app. Usually, as it is case with Flixbus, you will have to cut some features out in order to deliver the app as soon as possible. Rewrites have no direct benefits to the customer. Again, if everything goes well, your app will have exactly the same set of features. Meanwhile, your customers will not be getting bug fixes and support in the old app. Some features will get lost in translation. If your app is not extremely well documented, and let's be clear, it probably isn't, some small features will get lost. For example, some autocomplete functionality on some input field or some similar small feature. It takes longer than expected, always. And in the end, it's a huge risk. Big rewrite can damage or even kill the company if it goes bad. I think that Netscape is one of the best examples of this happening. Let's now go through the benefits of refactoring. First, you will be delivering constant value to the user. Your capacity will be inevitably reduced, but your users are still going to get new features and bug fixes. You will be not losing any knowledge. The existing app will have some workarounds around bugs at server side or some similar hidden knowledge that's hard to document and replicate. When refactoring, you will keep your old code base and with it all of its hidden knowledge. It's significantly lower risk. Refactoring can't fail. You will incrementally improve your code base, and if you decide that you don't have resources to proceed, you can just stop. And finally, it's continuously being user tested. Every change, every new feature is immediately put into production and user validated. You don't need to wait for the whole app to be finished and released in order to verify that one change is performing better. And what are the cons of refactoring? Well, first one is it's painfully slow. It can take a long time to get your code base to an acceptable state. And as I said before, you will need to accept that some parts of the app will stay in that bad state indefinitely. It requires careful planning. You can do mob refactoring. Well, you can, but your code base will not improve. You will be refactoring different parts of your code base in a different way, and you will end up in a never-ending refactoring hell. It can be hard for developers. Refactoring is not fun, and it requires a lot of patience. So if your team is not stable and experienced, it can fall apart. Keep in mind that the total cost of refactoring is always higher than doing a complete rewrite. But the impact on the organization is usually much, much smaller. This highly depends on the size of the company and size of the product. A small project is much easier to throw away and rewrite. The complexity of the rewrite grows exponentially with the size of the project. This is one of the reasons why unexperienced developers tend to prefer rewriting the app. They rewrote their small pet project like 5 times and everything was amazing. But this doesn't scale well. Some projects just can't be rewritten, ever. They're just too big, and going for the rewrite would have much bigger impact on the organization than leaving the project in its current state or trying to gradually improve it through refactoring. There is a reason why world still needs COBOL developers. So what should you do? Should you rewrite or refactor? Here we are talking about refactoring and rewrite that's visible to the business. That means long overall refactoring or rewrite of the whole app. You should refactor and rewrite small parts of your project constantly. And hopefully that way your company may never end up in the situation that requires major rewrite or refactoring. Before we go through the reasons to do rewrite or refactoring, let's first check one reason for which you should almost never refactor the app and most certainly never rewrite the app. The fundamental law of programming is it's harder to read code than to write it. But it's a bit easier to read it if you had written it, like yesterday. Because of this, some people decide to rewrite the app because they didn't write the code. This may seem funny to you, but it's more common than you think. It's usually not formulated like that, but it's instead something like this. I don't like the code style. It uses framework 1 and not framework 2, which is like 100 times better. Java sucks. I don't understand anything in this code base. All of these are valid reasons to improve your code base, but are not valid enough to halt feature development. Whenever you have problems with your code base, ask yourself who is impacted by those problems and by that code base. If it's just you, the developer, and business and users are not, you should be fixing your code base without impacting the business or users. When picking the solution for your company, you should put the company's need in the first place. You should not be solving developers' problems when doing refactoring or rewrite. But let's say that in your case, code is horrible, business is suffering, and you need to fix it. What should you do? Should you refactor or rewrite? Here, I have created a simple decision tree that will help you decide. So let's go to the first question. Is the code base really that bad? If not, start refactoring. You should rewrite the app only if it's much harder to refactor than to rewrite, like 5 times harder. Some things that are usually considered as a bad code base are in reality not as bad as they may seem. For example, if your code is slow and unoptimized, usually 10% of code is responsible for 90% of the speed. So this means that you don't have to rewrite the whole app to drastically improve its performance. Another often given reason is that architecture is bad. Yeah, it can be really boring and it's quite cumbersome to fix the app's architecture, but it can be done relatively easily. You just need to see it as a new challenge, plan it appropriately, and do it step by step. But let's say that in your case, it's really that bad. So let's go to the next question. Will there be a need to add new features in the existing app while working on the new one? If yes, you should be doing refactoring. Doing rewriting of the app while adding features to the old app is a common trap. First, if you can add features to your old code base, then it's not really that bad. Second, you will have a hard time achieving feature parity. Whenever you think you are done with your new app, there will be a feature that's just been added to the old one that's now missing from the new one. And finally, you will have an unhealthy competition between developers who are working on the old app and those creating new one. But let's say that you are able to get the feature freeze of your old app. Do you need more than 6 months to rewrite the app? If the answer is yes, you should be refactoring the app. First, your estimation is wrong, like really wrong. How do I know that? Well, you have a hard time understanding your old code base, but yet you need to recreate all of its features. Are you sure that you know all of its features? Are you sure that there is a better way to handle those legacy endpoints? Maybe adding GraphQL on top of everything will just make things worse? So just accept it. Your estimation is wrong, and keeping users without support for that long is never a good thing. But you have rockstar team that can do it in 3 months. Should you rewrite? Yes, but still be careful. Rewrites are seldom the real answer. You can refactor much of the code without losing anything and without a lot of the risk. But once you start rewrite, you're putting everything at risk. It's important to remember that when you start from scratch, there is absolutely no reason to believe that you're going to do a better job. First of all, you probably don't even have the same team that worked on the version 1. So you don't have more experience on the project. You're just going to make most of the old mistakes again and introduce some new ones that were not there in the original version. When refactoring, you always have working code. You're not throwing away business knowledge or obscure bug fixes, and developers aren't starting from scratch hoping that they can make something work. In other words, you're minimizing the risk. Newer isn't always better, and the idea that the new code is better than the old one is pretty absurd. Old code has been used and it has been tested. A lot of bugs have been found and they have been fixed. While rewriting always seems like a perfect choice, an opportunity to do everything better, to avoid all the mistakes of the old app, restrain yourself and pick the solution that's best for your company. Rewriting the app should be your last option. And that's it from me. Thank you. Here are the credits and also some articles that I used while exploring this topic, so feel free to read them for more information. Here are my contact informations, and you will be able to find these slides here. And yeah, now it's time for questions.
Hi, can we please see the questions? You can add more of them on Slido. Okay, I can start reading them. So the first question is, do you plan to convert everything to Kotlin? It can simplified code, no Java compatibility.
Yes, so we are working on rewriting everything to Kotlin, but not actively, which means that we are basically not rewriting things that are, how to put it, good enough or will not bring big value if improved. So basically, we are waiting for some features to basically get in line of priority to be worked on. But whenever we are making some bigger changes on some part of the codes of code base, we are always converting it to Kotlin.
Okay. Next questions. Are the iOS devs now happier than Android devs?
Yeah, well, I think they had a harder time than us because they were under a lot of pressures because they needed like additional 10 months to like publish first version of the app, and they are still under a lot of pressure because a lot of features from the iOS app is missing. So now they need to like follow us with the new features that we are adding, but also try to like add features that are missing. So yeah, I'm not sure if they are happier.
Okay. So as Android and iOS team were in the same situation, was there ever consideration of going cross-platform, Xamarin, Ionic, etc.?
Well, to be honest, not. Like first reason is that Android didn't want to rewrite the app. We wanted to work on the existing app because we had a bit more experience on the project and we were aware that yeah, it will take long time, but we just don't want to handle these like legacy endpoints and some weird stuff like in the new app. Those things are already handled for us. And iOS team, I think, didn't have experience with any cross-platform approach, so they chose the approach that they knew.
Cool. We have a lot of questions today. That's great. What about rewriting the app module by module instead of refactoring it? I don't understand. Rewriting the
Well,
app module by module instead
yeah,
of refactoring it module by module. Yeah.
This is interesting question. I think it's more about definition than really approach, because if you go like enough down, you will be rewriting the app, like either a specific method or specific class. So basically, you're always rewriting the app. Like refactoring doesn't really exist. But yeah, we had some like bigger parts of the app that were totally rewritten, but we were still not throwing away our code. We kept everything, and then if we need to like refactor one part of the code, like one screen, maybe we would create new screen, but we would keep still some business logic parts, some network requests, things like that. I hope this is like good enough, but we can have longer discussion. I will be next to like in this speaker's corner.
Okay. Have you ever worked with Xamarin Native for Android and iOS and MVVM Cross? What are your thoughts?
Oh no, I don't have. I was working as an iOS developer with Objective-C, but I never did cross-platform coding, so I don't have that much experience with that.
Okay. Do unit tests help more with rewriting or refactoring?
Well, the funny thing with both code bases is that they had a lot of tests. So I think like more than 60% of our like old code base was covered with tests. So some people wouldn't even call it legacy code. The thing is that it was like they were really tied to your implementation. So you were not able to change anything without breaking tests. So they were not that useful to us. It helps a lot, like when writing new parts of the code base, we are covering it with tests as much as possible. And because iOS was under a lot of pressures, their new app has less tests than the old one, which is kind of funny.
Thanks. And what are the long-term benefits of a rewrite by now?
Um, this is it like someone from iOS team would be probably better person to answer this, but I think it's much more enjoyable to work with Swift, and they just didn't have resources to like refactor Objective-C to Swift step by step. If you ever did Objective-C, it's I think horrible language. And just having that change is big enough improvement. I have to it's big enough improvement to have like happy team.
Great. If you refactor again and again, don't you think you will make the rewrite harder when it comes?
I'm not sure that I understand this, but if that's happening in your code base, you are refactoring wrongly.
Should be the opposite,
if
right?
you are if you are refactoring your code base, it should get better, and you should hopefully never need to rewrite it.
Okay, last question. So, are there any good general tips to show the business how painful and slow is the refactor? Sometimes the business has less understanding to developers and adding features while major refactor.
Yeah, it's hard. You need to be careful how you communicate it. You should always provide business value even to refactoring, saying that, hey, if I refactor this feature, adding A/B tests on this screen would be much easier. So every A/B test task will be like 3 points and not 5, and we need like 10 points to refactor it. Things like that. So it's when communicating with business, it's important to look at that from their perspective, because they will not understand if you say, yeah, it's struggle, we like null point exceptions, things like that. It's like they just don't care about that.
Thanks. So I now activated rating for Vladimir's talk. So please rate. So he has some feedback later. The Vladimir will now be going to the 3D world. You can meet him at Speaker's Corner. The speaker's corner is directly close to registration. It's really close where you spawn. It's not next to the stage. And when you are in the 3D world, you can also visit our partner booth. There are some surprises for you. There is a maze, and if you go through the maze, you can unlock something in the 3D world. And we will meet again here at the desert stage at 14:05, 2:05 p.m. Prague time. That's GMT +2. So thank you a lot, Vladimir.
Thank you for organizing this wonderful conference. And yep, bye. See you in virtual world.
Yeah, see you.